Hello everyone, I hope you are fine and good. This is your professor of economics, Brahim Gizani, and I'm very glad today to present for you the chapter number 4. This chapter number 4 is presentation is based on the slides of Professor Ron Cronovich, who prepared these slides on the basis of the textbook Principles of Macroeconomics by Professor Gregory Mankiw. Of course, I added some slides to this course by myself in order to explain some things I feel they need further explanations. So the slides will be in yellow colors. So let's start our chapter today. It's about our chapter is about markets well and welfare. We can call this chapter welfare economics too. Okay, so shall we start? And need to start. So I should hide my face for the moment. Okay. I think you remember in the first chapter, Introduction to Macroeconomics, we learned many principles of economics. The principle number 6 says markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity. And we have seen that market economy allocates resources through the decentralized decisions of many households and firms as they interact in markets. So, and we in these slides we presented this famous quote by the founder of economics, Mr. Adam Smith, who said in his book The Wealth of Nations, 1776, I quote, each of these households and firms act as if led by an invisible hand to promote general economic well-being, end of quote. So in this chapter, we will see, by the end of this chapter, we will see what this economist meant by invisible hand here. This is the objective of this chapter, is to explain this invisible hand, the meaning of the invisible hand quoted by Adam Smith, and they made this quotation by him very famous in the world of economics. So again, we come back to the principle number 6. We said that markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity. Okay, well, one can wonder why. Okay, and in these slides, we will try to answer this question of why markets are usually, not most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, are a good way to organize economic activity. In the chapter of, I remind you that in the chapter of the forces of supply and demand, we have seen how the way markets allocate scarce resources. By that we mean that the market equilibrium quantity is the result of supply and demand. So the equilibrium quantity is when the supply equals the demand. The question one can wonder is, are market allocation desirable? Is this arrangement of the economy desirable? This is an important word. What do you mean by desirable? Desirable means answering this question, or thinking about this question, does allocation of resources benefit the society as a whole. By society, we mean buyers and also sellers. These are the two main groups that represent a society. Is this allocation of resources that resulted from the market benefit the society composed of buyers and sellers? Is the situation desirable? This is the question. Then, is the equilibrium quantity too small or too large or just right? We will answer in this chapter, we will try to figure out this question. So before, let's talk about welfare economics. What do you mean by welfare economics? Welfare economics is about the allocation of resources. And the allocation of resources refers to three questions. The first question is, how much of each good is produced? Which producers produce it? Which consumers consume it? So, definition of welfare economics is the study of how the allocation of resources affect economic well-being. How the allocation of resources given by the market economy, when the production or the quantity supplied in the market is equal to the quantity demanded, and everything is the allocation is the result of the forces of demand and supply. What is its relationship with the economic well-being? So what do you mean by welfare economics? Actually, welfare economics consists mainly of two issues, mainly. The first is the determination of efficient states in which no individual can be made better off without someone being worse off. The second issue is the choice. The second issue of welfare economics is the choice between the many efficient states of the economy. The many efficient states of the economy. We can arrange the economy according to different states. One of them can be market economy. Okay, but we can arrange the economy according to different states. So the welfare economics is trying to study these states and see how these states are beneficial to the society as a whole. So it is the choice between the many efficient states of the economy that can exist, whether through a decision imposed by a dictator or through democratically determined decisions. Here, by a dictator, it means whether the government should take or make the decisions instead of the market, as it exists and still exists in some countries, and existed and this state existed in many other countries where bureaucrats and government replace the market, or through democratically determined decision means here it means that our decisions are made according mainly to the market and the freedom of sellers and buyers. So in this chapter, we will try to measure this well-being according to many states of the economy. Okay, and we economists can measure this welfare or this well-being, and they determined some measures to measure this well-being, society's well-being. So we will see in the chapter what is consumer surplus. How is it related to the demand curve? So here we'll see in this chapter we'll try to determine how economists compute consumer surplus, which represents the well-being of the consumers. And we'll see how to compute the producer surplus. What is producer surplus? How is it related to the supply curve? The producer surplus, we will see that it represents the well-being of producers. And we'll finally answer this question: do markets produce a desirable allocation of resources? Is the market economy desirable? Is the allocation of resources by the forces of the demand and supply desirable? Or is there another state of the economy that can give better or more well-being to the society? Or could the market outcome be improved upon? If the market outcome can be improved by another arrangement, it means that the market is not giving the highest well-being to the society. So first, we will try to measure the first component of well-being, and we'll start by consumers. So before to be able to compute the consumer's well-being, which we are going to call consumer surplus, we need to work to first define what do we mean by the willingness to pay, WTP. And we start with this example or this definition. A buyer's willingness to pay for a good is the maximum amount the buyer will pay for that good. So this is actually the definition of the demand curve. The demand curve represents all combinations or combination of price and quantities, and for each quantity the demand curve indicates the maximum price that a buyer is willing to pay for that quantity. So the willingness to pay, as we will see later, is actually the demand curve. WTP measures how much the buyer value the good. For example, here we have an example. Let's see, we have 4 buyers: Anthony, Chad, Flea, and John. And these 4 buyers willingness to pay for an iPod have, each buyer has its own maximum price to pay for an iPod. For example, Anthony here is able to pay an iPod. For an iPod, he is able to pay $250. On the other hand, Chad is willing to pay a maximum of $175. Flea is able to pay $300, a maximum of $300. John is able to pay a maximum amount of $125 for an iPod. So here for each buyer, this table represents the maximum amount they are able to pay for an iPod, so their willingness to pay. Question here. If the price of iPod is $200, who will buy an iPod and what is the quantity demanded? According to this table, if the price of an iPod is $200, it is obvious that Anthony and Flea will buy an iPod, but Chad and John will not. Therefore, the quantity demanded is two units of iPods when the price is $200. So let's see then complete this table. Here we have the price of an iPod, who buys the iPod, and the quantity demanded. Suppose that the price is between $301 or up. So according to our table, it seems nobody will be able to buy an iPod that costs $301 or more. So as I see, nobody is buying. So the quantity demanded is 0. So if the price is between 251 and 300, so only Flea will be able to buy an iPod. Therefore, the quantity demanded is 1. If the price is between 176 and 250, Anthony and Flea will buy iPods. So the quantity demanded, therefore, will be 2. If the price is between 126 and 175, here we have 3 possible buyers, Chad, Anthony, and Flea, and the quantity demanded will be 3. If the price is between 0 and $125, everybody will be able to buy, the 4 buyers will be able to buy, so the quantity demanded is 4 units. So here we have the schedule the demand schedule of each for every range of prices. So we can represent this schedule on this graph where the y-axis represents prices and the x-axis represents quantities. So representing every range and the corresponding every range of prices and the corresponding quantity purchased, we can get this graph. For example, if the price is $175, 3 units are sold or bought. If the price is between 126 and 175, 3 units of iPods are bought. If the price is 125, 4 units of iPods are bought. And if the price is between 0 and 125, 4 units of iPods are bought. So we find a curve that looks like a staircase shape that represents the demand curve of of iPods. So this demand curve looks like a staircase with 4 steps, one per buyer, one step per buyer. So if there were a huge number of buyers, as in competitive markets, instead of just 4 buyers, there would be a huge number of very tiny steps. And therefore this staircase shaped curve will become then will look more like a smooth curve. So like a smooth curve means like the demand curve we all know. So at any Q, the height of the D curve is the willingness to pay of the marginal buyer. The height of each of the demand curve actually represents the willingness to pay of the marginal buyer. Example, this is the height. What I mean by is represented by the height. So this height represents the willingness to pay for the marginal buyer. Who is the marginal buyer? The marginal buyer is the buyer who would leave the market if the price P were any higher. So the marginal buyer is actually the buyer who would leave the market, who would quit the market, who would not buy iPods if the price was higher. For example, for the buyer number 2 who bought the iPod number 2, the height of the curve when the number of the quantity is 2 is 150 is above 175. Okay, is 175. 175. It is the buyer number 2. If the price is higher, okay, if the price is, for example, 250, this buyer number 2 will quit the market. And we will stay with only one buyer. Flair's willingness to pay is represented by this is represented here, and Anthony's willingness to pay is represented here. It is 250, and Chad's willingness to pay is 175, and is represented here. And lastly, John's willingness to pay. So let's then define the consumer's surplus, CS. The consumer surplus is the amount a buyer is willing to pay minus the buyer actually pays. So it is the amount a buyer is willing to pay. So it is the maximum price that a buyer is able and willing to pay, minus what he or she actually pays. So we can write this formula. CS is WTP minus P. Willingness to pay minus price. Suppose, for example, the price is 260. So if the price is 260, there will be only one buyer in the market, who is Flea, and Flea's consumer surplus will be the amount she is willing to pay, which is $300. Flea is willing to pay a maximum of $300 for an iPod. But actually, she pays only $260 because the price in the market is $260. Applying the formula of the consumer surplus of Flea will be then 300, what she is willing to pay, minus 260, what she actually pays, and we get $40. We say that Flea's consumer surplus is $40. It's like that Flea has saved $40 in her pocket. The others get no CS because they do not buy an iPod at this price. Therefore, the total consumer surplus is $40. So let's represent the consumer surplus in our demand curve. Here we have Flea willing to pay 300, and here we have the price in the market that is 260. Flea's consumer's surplus is $40. Total consumer surplus in the market is $40. And if just one moment, so the market total consumer surplus is represented by this green rectangle. Okay, the surface of this green rectangle represents the total surplus in the market. Actually, it is $40. Each consumer is gaining from this transaction times this is the $40 times the number of consumers who buy this good in the market. In the market, we have only one consumer, who is Flea. So the number of consumers is 1. $40 times 1 represents the total consumers in the market, and therefore on this graph it is represented by this green rectangle. Suppose now that the price is now $220. Of course, Flea will buy this iPod, and therefore her consumer surplus will increase because she is willing to pay $300, and she actually pays $220. So she gets a consumer surplus of $80. Also, there is another consumer who is now able to buy this iPod. Anthony is willing to pay a maximum of $250 for this iPod, and he gets it $250. But finally he gets it at a cheaper price, $240. $20. So here Anthony's can make a consumer surplus in the market, which is equal $30. So here we have two consumers in the market. Total, which makes the total consumer surplus 110, which is 80 plus $80 plus $30. And this consumer surplus is represented by this green area. So the lesson here is that total consumer surplus equals the area under the demand curve and above the price from 0 to Q. Total consumer surplus equals the area under the demand curve, which is under this demand curve, and above the price. This is the price. This is the price. And under this demand curve. From 0 to Q here. So let's suppose now we have lots of buyers and a smooth demand curve, not staircase shaped curve. We see this example. The demand for shoes, the market for shoes, the price per pair, and the quantity in terms of thousands of pairs of shoes. Here is our demand curve. If the quantity is 5, the marginal buyer here, the marginal buyer is willing to pay $50 for pair of shoes. I repeat, the marginal buyer is the buyer who will leave the market if the price is higher. If the quantity is 5, the marginal buyer is willing to pay, according to the demand curve, $50. He will leave the market if the price was higher than $50. Suppose that the price in the market is $30. Then this consumer who is willing to pay $50 for a pair of shoes will make a surplus of $20, represented by this green, this red line. So here, if the price of the shoes in the market is 50,000 pairs of shoes will be bought according to the demand curve. So we can therefore represent in this on this diagram the consumer surplus. The consumer surplus is the area below the demand curve and above the price, here below the demand curve and above the price, over the quantity from 0 to Q, which is here 15,000. Recall that this area, is actually the surface of the triangle. Recall that the area of a triangle equals 1/2 times the base times the height. The height here of this triangle is, as you can see, 60 minus $30, which makes the height of this triangle $30. Therefore, if we compute the surface of this triangle that represents the consumer surplus, it would be 1/2 times 15, which is the base here, 15, the base, and the base represents the quantity of shoes bought, times 30, which represents the height of this triangle. And we get a CS of $225. So the consumer surplus in this market would be $225. How about a higher price and the effect of a higher price on consumer surplus? Now suppose the price rises to $40. Therefore, only 10,000 pairs of shoes will be bought. So what happens? We will have a new consumer surplus, of course, because the height and the base of the triangle have changed. So now the area represented by that is below the demand curve and above the new price through the quantities between 0 and 10 is this pink triangle, which, as you can see, its surface is now lower than the previous blue triangle. So obviously the consumer surplus has decreased as a result of an increase in the price. The price was $30, it is now $40. So we get, therefore, a new consumer surplus 1/2 times 10, the new base, times 20, the new height, and we get a consumer surplus of $100. So there are two reasons for the fall on the consumer surplus. The first reason is of the fall on consumer surplus is that some buyers have left the market. This area that is lost from the previous consumer surplus represents the area lost because some buyers left the markets. Some buyers who were able to buy at a price lower than $40. Now these buyers are not able to buy a pair of shoes that is greater than or equal to $40, leave the market, and because they quit the market, the consumer surplus decreases. So this is the first reason. The second reason is represented by this area that is lost. This area, this fall in the consumer surplus, represented by this area, is due to remaining buyers paying higher price. So these buyers are able to buy a pair of shoes that is whose price is 40 or higher. Okay, they are still able to buy it, but now each buyer here will find his consumer surplus shrinking. Why? Because now instead of buying the shoes at $30, now they are paying more, a more expensive price, which is $40. So they are losing $10. This loss will then affect their surplus, and then will make their consumer surplus fall. So here we see that this pink triangle representing the new consumer surplus has an area that is lower than the blue triangle, because and which shows that an increase in the price from $30 to $40 has decreased the consumer surplus. This decrease in the consumer surplus as a result of an increase in the price is explained by two reasons. The first reason is that some buyers are leaving the market. And the second reason is that the remaining buyers in the market now are paying a higher price. So now let's go to the second part. In the equation, we have seen we have defined the consumer surplus that measures the well-being of the consumers. Now let's try to define how the welfare economists measure the well-being of the second group in the society, who are the producers. Before going to that, let's define or recall some concepts. The cost is the value of everything a seller must give up to produce a good, i.e. the opportunity cost. So it includes costs of all resources used to produce the good, including value of the seller's time. So every cost that a seller must incur to produce something. So let's see this example. The costs of 3 sellers in the lawn cutting business. So here we have sellers, Angelo, Hunter, and Kitty. Each one, when he produces his good, it costs for Angelo $10 a unit, but for Hunter a unit costs $20, and for Kitty a unit of production costs $35. A seller will only produce and sell the good if the price exceeds his or her cost. This is very obvious. Otherwise, the seller would make negative profits, losses, and then cannot sustain in the market. Hence, cost is a measure of willingness to sell. So we have seen the willingness to buy for the buyers. When we talk about producers, we talk about the willingness to sell. A producer is willing to sell a product. His willingness to sell a product depends on the cost of producing this product. So here we are asked to derive the supply schedule from the cost data, as we have done for the demand schedule for the buyers. We can make a supply schedule for the sellers. Suppose the price is between $0 and $9. Who is going to sell in the market? Obviously, from these costs, no one would be able to sell at a price less than or equal $9. So here the quantity supplied is 0. If the price now is between $10 and $19, according to this schedule, only Angelo will be able to sell his product, because his costs are $10 and the price is between $10 and $19. So the quantity supplied is only one unit. If the price, likewise, if the price is between 20 and 34, Angelo and Hunter will be able to sell in the market and the quantity supplied is 2. And if the price is between 35 or up, the three sellers will be able to sell in the market, and therefore the quantity supplied in this market will be 3. So we can draw this supply schedule, which is also is the supply curve. Here we still have a staircase shaped supply curve. So you see here, if the price is between 0 and 9, no one is selling in the market and the quantity supplied is 0. If the price becomes between 10 and 19, only 1 unit is supplied in the market. If the price is between 20 and 34, 2 units are supplied in this market. And if the price is greater than or equal $35, 3 units would be supplied in this market. Therefore, at each Q, the height of the S-curve supply curve, is the cost of the marginal seller. Here we have talked about the marginal buyer. Now also we have talked about the marginal seller, who is the seller who would leave the market if the price were any lower. Example here. The height of, at quantity 2, the height is 20. So this marginal seller will leave the market if the price is below this level. Here we have each seller's cost. So let's then see the definition of the producer surplus. The producer surplus, PS, is the price in the market minus the costs of the producer. So the producer surplus, PS, is the amount a seller is paid for a good minus the seller's cost. So it is the amount of this a seller paid, actually paid. Okay, this is actual money paid to the seller minus the seller's cost, which is the price actually it is the price at which the seller can or is willing to sell, or it's his price, or would accept to sell his price. So here this producer surplus is actually the gain a producer can have from participating in this market. So let's see each seller's producer surplus, and we will then compute the total producer surplus in the market, which represents all sellers' producer surpluses. Suppose the price is $25. Here we have $25. If the price is $25, as we can see from this supply curve, Angelo will be able to sell in the market, and Hunter will be able to sell in the markets. So we have here two sellers who will enter this market to sell their products. But Kitty is not able to sell in this market because his costs are actually higher than the price in the market. Obviously, if Kitty enters this market, he or she will make losses. So he decides it is better to stay out of this market. So only Hunter and Angelo will enter this market. Angelo's producer surplus is 15. Why 15? 15, it is 25 minus 10. Okay, so in each unit he sells, he gets $15. How many units he sells? He sells 1 unit. So this rectangle representing this blue rectangle with the blue area represents Angelo's producer surplus. But still we have another seller in this market, who is Hunter. Hunter also makes a producer surplus of $5. He's paid $25, and the cost of the unit he sells is $20. So 25 minus 20 is 5. And he sells 1 more unit. So for each unit, for the unit he sells, he makes $5. So the area of the rectangle, this blue rectangle, represents Hunter's producer surplus. It is obvious to say that the Kitty's producer surplus is 0 because Kitty is not in the market actually. So the total surplus will be Angelo's producer surplus plus Hunter's producer surplus, which is 15 plus 5. That makes $20. And this $20 is represented by this area, this blue area. What is this blue area that represents the total producer surplus? It equals the area above the supply curve under the price from 0 to Q. So this blue area, it is actually the area above the supply curve and below the price over the quantity supplied in the market, which is here in this case 2 units of good. If we use the smooth S curve, instead of having just a few sellers, let's suppose we have hundreds of sellers, this makes our staircase shaped curve smooth curve like this one. And we have the same example of shoes, of the market of shoes. Suppose the price in this market is $40. If the quantity supplied is 15, so we can say that the marginal seller's cost is $30. The marginal seller's cost is $30. This marginal seller will leave the market if the price is below $30. So if the price is $40, of course he will stay in the market, and this marginal seller will make $10 as a surplus. Here the price is $40, so if the quantity supplied is 25, as we have said, the consumer surplus, it is the area above the supply curve and below the price line throughout the quantity supplied. So this area is not included. Why? Because we stop at the quantity of 25. So this pink triangle represents the total producer surplus in the market when the price is $40. So we know how to compute the area of a rectangle. It is 1/2 times the height times the base. So the height of the triangle here, it is h. 40 minus 15, here it is 15. So if the cost of production is 15, or if the price is 15 or below, no seller will enter this market. So we compute this a pink triangle area, and we get 1/2 times 25, that represents the base, times 25, that represents the height, and we get total producer surplus equals to $312.5. So let's see what happens when the price falls from $40 to $30. As you can see, the new area of total producer surplus has shrinked. It was the whole area of the pink triangle. Now it is represented by the new producer surplus is represented by this small yellow triangle. This surface shrink is a result of a fall in the price. The fall in the price is good for the consumers, but obviously it is not good for the producers, because Now the producer surplus is now lower than before, and it is equal to 112.5. So let's explain this shrink. What is the causes or the reasons of this shrink in the producer surplus? There are, like the consumer, what happened for the consumer surplus after an increase in the price. The decrease in the price shrinks the producer surplus, and there are two reasons. The first reason is that this fall is due to sellers leaving the market. The new price is not encouraging them to stay in the market. If they sell at the new price, they will make losses, so they prefer quit the market. And this area represents the fall in the producer surplus due to the sellers who are leaving the market after a fall in the price. And this area is represent the second reasons why the producer surplus has decreased, and this decrease is due to the remaining sellers getting lower price, are paid lower than before. So their gains, the remaining sellers are seeing their gains shrinking. This shrink in these gains will affect negatively their producer surplus. So let's recapitulate now. So what do consumer surplus, producer surplus, and total surplus measures? As we have told you in the slides before, actually these are measures for the benefits that each group in the society is getting from the participating in the market, going to the market to buy or going to the market to sell. But the consumer surplus represents actually the benefits a buyer or the buyers are getting from the market. The producer surpluses represents the gains that producers are getting when participating in the market. Therefore, the total surplus would represent therefore the total gains that both groups of buyers and sellers are getting in participating in the market. So the consumer surplus actually represents the value of the good to buyers, means how the buyers value the good, minus the amount paid actually by these buyers. So the consumer surplus measures the benefits buyers receive from participating in the market. PS, producer surplus, represents the amount received by sellers, actually received by the sellers, paid to them by the buyers, minus the cost to the sellers, means the lowest price at which they are willing or are able to sell their goods. So PS measures the benefit sellers receive from participating in the markets. So here we talk about benefit to buyers, here benefits to sellers. So both benefits represents actually the benefits we get from the market. And it is the criteria used by economists to judge if the state of a market economy is a desirable state or not. Remember the word desirability. So total surplus is consumer surplus plus producer surplus, and total surpluses measures the total gains from trade in the market. total gains from trade in the market. So this total surplus will be the criteria on which we judge if the market is a good and optimal state of the economy, or there is another state of the economy that would be more beneficial. So let's see the market allocation of resources, how it is. Remember these slides. In a market economy, the allocation of resources is decentralized, means it is not the government that make the allocation of resources. Is not a centralized government that makes this allocation. It is decentralized. Decentralized means under the forces of the supply and the demand. So this allocation of resources is decentralized, determined by the interactions of many self-interested buyers and sellers. Here the word self-interested is very important. We will come back to it later when we talk about the invisible hand of Adam Smith. So it is the interaction of many self-interested buyers and sellers. Buyers are going to the market for their self-interest. They want to buy the good as cheap as possible. Or more precisely, they want to buy goods they value high, but at lower prices, or as cheap as possible. Sellers also, they are self-interested. They are going to the market and they want to sell goods they produce it at specific costs, but at higher prices, at prices as high as possible. So is the market's allocation of resources desirable? The market allocation of resources is desirable if we let the market forces determine the market allocation, that is the market equilibrium. Actually, it is actually the market's allocation. It is the equilibrium in the market. So, is the equilibrium of the market a desirable situation, desirable state, or would a different allocation of resources make society better off? To answer this question, we use a total surplus as a measure of society's well-being. So we will use a total surplus to tell us whether the equilibrium of the market is a desirable situation, or is there another situation that makes society better off than the market. So measuring society's well-being, here we have total surplus. Total surplus is consumer surplus plus producer surplus. We rewrite these the equations and we can simplify it, and we find finally that total surplus is the value to buyers, or the value that buyers are willing to pay for the good minus the cost of the good to the sellers. So the final equation, simplified equation, total surplus is value to buyers minus cost to sellers. So here an allocation of resources is efficient if it maximizes total surpluses. So let's see if the market allocation of resources give us the maximum total surplus, or if it is not, this means that there is another arrangement that we should or societies should take. Otherwise, the market is the best arrangement for resource allocations. Efficiency means, here we respond to the questions we said earlier in the first slides. Efficiency means raising or lowering the quantity of a good would not increase total surplus. Here we talk about how much production or how much quantity of production should be produced. The second question is, the second meaning of the efficiency is the goods are being produced by the producers with lowest cost. And this reminds us of the question of who is producing this product. And the third point is the goods are being consumed by the buyers who value them most highly. This reminds us of that question: who is consuming? Who are the consumers who are consuming? So here, the first question, how much? Here we talk about how much. Here, who are the producers who are producing? And here, who are the consumers who are consuming the market, in the market. So here the slide is about efficiency and equity. Sometimes efficiency goes in contradiction, is not contrast with equity, which this conflict that sometimes happens allows the government to intervene sometimes. Okay, let's come back to the evaluation of the market equilibrium. So here we let the forces of the market decide, and we get an equilibrium where the quantity produced and bought is 15, and the price 15,000. Okay, and the price of equilibrium is $30. We said that the consumer surplus is the area below the demand curve and above the price. So this blue triangle represents the consumer surplus, and this yellow triangle, that is the area above the supply curve and below the price, represents the producer surplus. Here the question is this total surplus represented by this whole area of the sum of the area of the consumer surplus plus the producer surplus area given by this equilibrium situation. This equilibrium situation means by the market. Is this market equilibrium efficient? Means does it give us the maximum well-being for the society, or it is possible to increase this well-being using another maybe tool rather than the market? So let's see. Which buyers get to consume the good first? At equilibrium, every buyer whose willingness to pay is higher than or is greater than or equal $30 will buy. So those buyers will buy. Those buyers will buy because they value the good at a higher price than $30. In contrast, those who value the good at a price lower than $30 will not buy this good. So at the equilibrium, therefore at the equilibrium, the buyers who value the good most highly are the ones who consume it. So who are the consumers who are consuming? Here, when at the market equilibrium, are the buyers. They are the buyers who value the good most highly, most highly means more than the equilibrium, at a value that is more or equal, greater than or equal to the equilibrium price. Those buyers. Which sellers produce the good? Who are the sellers who are going to produce the good? Only the sellers whose cost is lower than or equal $30 will produce the good. These are the sellers who are able to sell at the good at a price equal or less than $30. However, those sellers whose cost is higher than $30 will not sell in the market, so will not participate in the market. Hence, the sellers, therefore, these sellers who stay in the market are those with the lowest cost of production. So the sellers with the lowest cost produce the good. So here we answer the question, who is producing the good? The producers who are producing the good are those who are producing it at a lower cost. Does equilibrium quantity maximize total surplus? Means, does the market give us the maximum total surplus, the maximum well-being? Let's see. If the quantity is $20, the cost of producing the marginal unit is 35. But the value to consumers, here the value to consumers of the marginal unit whose cost is 35 is only $20. So the cost of the marginal unit is 35, but the consumers are valuing it at 20. So here there would not be any trade. The seller will not be able to sell his product to consumers who are valuing it at a lower value. So how we can increase the total surplus? The only way to increase the total surplus is by lowering the quantity produced. It is 20, so we should lower it. At 20, nothing here is, no benefits is there. So by lowering the quantity from 20 to 15, at 15, the price becomes 30, and here all the sellers, here when the price is 30 and the quantity is 15, there would be a trade transaction, and then there would be benefits from the trade. Suppose the price is now, the quantity is 10. The cost of production here of the marginal unit is 25, and the consumers value the marginal unit at $40. Here the price consumers are willing to pay is higher than the cost of producers. Therefore, there will be possible trade, of course. There would be possible trade. everyone is here, producer, both consumers and producers are feeling they are benefiting from this trade. The question here is if we increase production, can we increase the benefits? Actually, yes. If we increase the production, the total surplus increases from this area to add this new area. So there is benefits from increasing the quantity produced, the level of production. Therefore, an increase in total surplus by an increase in Q, and therefore we increase, sellers will increase their supply in the market until they reach, for example, 15, which is the quantity of equilibrium. So here we understand from here that the quantity of equilibrium 15, to which it corresponds to price of equilibrium $30, gives actually the maximum total surplus. The maximum total surplus. If the quantity is lower than the equilibrium quantity, the total surplus is still positive, but it might be better. If the quantity is of supply in the market is higher than 15, there is no increase in the total surplus beyond the one realized at the equilibrium. Therefore, the maximum total surplus, the maximum benefits that both producers and consumers can get from the market is realized actually by the market, by the equilibrium, at the equilibrium of the market, therefore by the market. So we can say that the market equilibrium is efficient. Why? Because the equilibrium quantity maximizes total surplus. There is no other level of production that can make total surplus higher than the equilibrium quantity. So the equilibrium quantity is a maximum. At this level of production, the goods are produced by the producers with the lowest cost and consumed by the buyers who value them most highly. Okay, so the markets could letting the market decide, letting the forces of the market decide by itself, we get the maximum total surplus in the economy. The government cannot improve on the market outcome. It is if the government intervene instead of the market forces, this would not improve the market. As you have seen in the examples, no other quantity except the market equilibrium quantity can give a higher outcome than the market outcome. So this is at the origin of the saying we economists always say, which is the French sentence laissez-faire economy. It's adopted from French, which means allow them to do. The government should not, which means that the government should not interfere with the market. The government should let the market free, the buyers free, and the sellers free to interact, and by their interaction they will get the maximum benefits. Why non-market allocations are usually bad? Why non-market allocation like government intervention in the market are usually bad? I always insist on the word usually. Here we talk in general. Of course, there are always exceptions. So why non-market allocation, or in other words, government intervention is usually bad? Suppose the allocation of resources were instead determined by a central planner. Central planner means the government. Central planner or social planner. Okay. Suppose the allocation of resources were instead determined by a central planner. Example, a bureaucrat or a ministry or a minister or a chief of government who decides, like what existed in the ex-communist countries. You see, you know that the ex-Soviet and communist countries, these regimes banned the existence of market, and of course they had to replace it by making decisions by bureaucrats and by governments who should decide what the price of a good, the quantity that should be produced of the good, and the producers who should produce the good, and of course the consumers who should consume this good. To choose an efficient allocation, this planner would need to know every seller's cost and every buyer's willingness to pay for each of the thousands of goods produced in the economy. Can you imagine this load of work that this central planner should do if the market is not allowed to exist? This is a huge load of work that is beyond human capacity. So this is practically impossible. This is why centrally planned economies like the ex-Soviet Union and other ex-communist countries economies, the ex-communist country economies, were never very efficient. Centrally planned economies are never very efficient, and this is proved by the experience and the history. Those who banned the existence of market, these economies could not survive for a long time, and they ended up by collapsing. And that this experience is a big proof and clear proof that it is almost impossible to replace the market. Replacing the market means you should have a quantity of informations and deal with the quantity of information that is beyond human capacity, beyond central planner capacity. And if this would of course explain why central planner and the economies that counted on central planner could not allocate the resources efficiently and ended up by collapsing. The market equilibrium gives the maximum benefits to a society was actually said long time ago by Adam Smith, who is a British philosopher who lived between 1723 and 1790, and who wrote a very famous book, The Wealth of Nation, in 1776. Actually, he predicted the failure of the central planner. In this passage that I would read to you, every individual neither intends to promote the public interest nor knows how much he is promoting it. Here he means that every individual, whether a seller or a buyer, actually he's looking for his own interest, not the public interest, like a central planner who thinks his decisions are for the interest of the public. Okay? Here it says that neither intends to promote the public interest. So every individual, producers and consumers are looking for their own interest. Consumers want to buy the goods they value the most at a cheaper price, and the producers want to sell the goods they produce at a specific cost at higher prices. So by everyone entering the market or participating in the market to look for his own interest, he intends only his own gain. And he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. Here, Adam Smith means that when everyone in the market is looking for his own interest, all individuals will end up an outcome that is efficient. That outcome is the total surplus. A total surplus is the highest when the equilibrium, when we let the forces of the market work to give the equilibrium, situation of equilibrium. So here everyone is looking for his own interest. It's like there is an invisible hand who guide both sellers and buyers. This invisible hand is like it is guiding them, both groups, both self-interested groups, without knowing, guiding them to promote an outcome that is the maximum total surplus, which was no part of their intention. Nor it is always the worse for the society that it was no part of it. By pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of the society. So by pursuing his own interest, each individual buyer and seller is pursuing his own interest. He ends up, it is like he is guided by an invisible hand to promote society's interest. So he frequently promotes that of the society more effectually, more efficiently means, than when he really intends to promote it. It means that if he intends to promote and volunteer to promote the society's interest, like a government by definition is supposed to promote society's interest. If it does show, the experience and the theory shows that it cannot promote it as much as this invisible hand do. So Adam Smith spoke about this. Spoke about the benefits of the laissez-faire and letting the forces of the market work to, to result in an outcome that gives the highest and the maximum benefits we call total surplus to the society. If we replace or we interfere, he says that if there is an interference with these forces of the market by a government, the outcome will be always less than the market outcome. So conclusions. In this chapter used welfare economics to demonstrate that principle we talked about, that is, markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity. Here we have shown that why we confirmed or we demonstrated these principles, because the market outcome coming from the forces, the works of the forces of the supply and demand, give the highest total surplus possible for both consumers and consumers and producers and for the society. Interfering with the government forces, interfering with these market forces might very likely might reduce the benefits to the society. But we should remind this point that we are assuming that the markets are perfectly competitive. Means there is competition in the market. There is no barriers to entry to this market. Any sellers can enter the market at any time, and any buyer can enter the market at any time. So this is an important assumption for this principle. So in the real world, sometimes there are market failures. When unregulated markets fail to allocate resources efficiently, why? Because of the existence of market power. The market power exists when there is whether one single buyer or one single seller. If there is one single buyer or one single seller, the price in the market would not be the equilibrium price, but a price decided by these powerful individuals who have market power. And they will decide another price rather than the market price, and therefore the total surplus would not be the maximum one we have seen as an outcome of an outcome of the equilibrium of the market. Also, externalities can make market failures. Side effect of transaction, of production, etc., like the pollution. The pollution is like a cost we pay indirectly in our health. So when market fails, when there is no competition or perfect competition, or there is one seller in the market like in the monopoly, this can explain or legitimate public interventions. So when market fails, public policy may remedy the problem and increase efficiency. So here, market failures explain government interventions. Welfare economics sheds light on market failures and government policies. Despite the possibility of market failure, the assumption in this chapter work well in many markets. That is the assumption we mean by the perfect competitive markets. And the invisible hand remains extremely important. So here, chapter summary. In this chapter, we have seen many interesting things. The height of the demand curve reflects the value of the good to buyers, their willingness to pay for it. Consumer surplus is the difference between what buyers are willing to pay for a good and what they actually pay. On the graph, consumer surplus is the area between price and the demand curve. The height of the supply curve is seller's cost of producing the good. Sellers are willing to sell if the price they get is at least as high as their cost. Producer surplus is the difference between what sellers receive for a good and their cost of producing it. On the graph, producer surplus is the area between the price P and the curve, the supply curve. To measure society's well-being, we use total surplus, the sum of consumer and producer surplus. Efficiency means that total surplus is maximized, that the goods are produced by sellers with the lowest cost, and that they are consumed by buyers who most value them. Under perfect competition, the market outcome is efficient. Altering it would reduce total surplus. So here I have finished presenting these slides. I hope I was clear, and thank you for your attention.